Hi, I'm Philip Martin, and I'm really glad that you're joining us here today. It's 9 a.m. here in California, here in Los Angeles, and we're here with Tomory Dodge. Uh,
Hi.
let's see here. I realize I'm just a little bit far ahead in my image flow, so we'll go back here to the beginning. The people, I think, sort of filtering into the chat here. Oh, we got a nice group of people coming in, so that's really good.
Oh, good.
Okay, so we're live. I'm Philip Martin. I'm the owner of Philip Martin Gallery, co-owner with Portia Hine, who's my wife, and she's an artist, and you might have seen her at the fairs. I had a chance to meet her or in the gallery. I just want to thank all of you guys for joining us today. We're here with Tomory Dodge. I'm extremely excited about this conversation. We've had some great conversations this past week. If you hadn't get a chance to see those, we've started a YouTube channel that you can check out. And that is got some of the featured videos. We spoke last week with Holly Coulis, Katie Cowan, and Christy Luck, sort of celebrating our Freeze Week. And on that channel, we also will put up one of Tomory's videos. You may not know that he's a musician. Goes also under the name there, which is also his Instagram, which is New Weather, and has collaborated with Cheryl Cambris on some really remarkable videos. So we'll put some of that up. But today we're going to talk about his paintings. So Tomory, thank you so much for joining us and having us here in the studio with you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for doing this. I'm really excited.
Well, we're really excited to have you. Tomory and I actually live fairly close to one another. And Tomory right now is in his studio. How long have you been in this studio?
Let's see. It's about 8 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, to be a little fanny, I'm just going to admit that I have been a huge fan of Tomory's from pretty much day one. I moved to Los Angeles in 2000, which was a really exciting time because the amount of artists moving here has just gone through the roof. And I had an incredible chance to watch the city change and to be able to participate in the growth of this city and the connections between Los Angeles and elsewhere, and just meet so many amazing artists. And Tomory has always been a part of my experience here. I went to your MFA show at Art Center at the Wind Tunnel in
the Wind Tunnel show, yeah.
So that was in 2003, and it was this massive.
I think it was 2004, but yeah, it was
okay,
like, yeah.
2004. I don't think I went to your studio during MFA, which is actually at Cal Arts, which is where you went to school.
Right.
Here we're going to start, we're looking at some images of Tomory's show at the gallery recently. And so these are a selection of paintings. We're looking at Capricorn, which is the painting on the right, House of Sleeping Robots in the middle, and a painting called Tree on the left. Tomory, talk to us just a little bit about this body of work and some of the things maybe that you were thinking about.
Yeah, like this body of work kind of, I guess it's kind of a continuation of the things that I've been developing in the work over the last several years. There's kind of like this investigation of form that really comes out of like the way I approach painting itself. I usually won't start with a really solid idea in mind. If I do, it usually only lasts like a day or two before it's, you know, it totally falls apart and turns into something else. So like a lot of the form kind of comes out of just like this process of painting and, you know, trying to, I often think like when I'm working, I'm really just trying to figure out what it is I'm doing. And like once I come up with like a theory of what it is, it's like, you know, it kind of falls apart and turns into something else. So it's like this ongoing process. It almost kind of feels like a feedback loop of, you know, things developing that way. And I've been bringing in a lot of pattern or dots in the recent work to kind of help define forms and, filter other forms out. And things kind of like, evolve that way. There's like maybe probably a bit of like, I've kind of thought of this more recent work as having, in some instances of having some kind of like psychedelic component to it. A lot of the times the patterns like will have some kind of like optical reactivity to them where, the color will start to vibrate a little bit. And,
so many kind of amazing different topics to talk about there, just launching what you're saying. One of the things that you mentioned is rebirth in the paintings, and you mentioned feedback loops. And obviously, as a musician, one thing you've sort of said to me as a kind of metaphor is you mentioned that the music you do, which is called modular synthesis, is a type of music where you essentially can resample yourself. And so metaphorically, as far as the paintings go, any end point can be a beginning point. So it feels like these paintings, and this one is called Capricorn, go through periods of, do they go through periods of rebirth?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to think about it is that they constantly go through periods of rebirth, really. I mean, since there's no kind of preconceived endpoint I'm trying to work towards with these paintings, or if there is one, it's very short-lived, let's say. It's like this constant kind of process of things getting painted out or, scraped off and so on. So
you're saying that they're always in rebirth.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at a certain point, it raises the question, well, when is it done, right? That's the obvious, like, kind of question that comes up. And it's really hard to say, but basically I just stop working on them. That's when they're done. I get to a point where I don't want to work on them anymore. And it's like, I don't think that's like kind of, I'm not dismissive of them, but it's like there's whatever that drive to kind of keep messing with stuff kind of fades away.
Well, you put your energy into them and they exist in the way they do. I once saw Franz Vest give a talk about his work, and someone once said, do you ever want to go back and work on them? And he basically said, my work is alive at the moment that I'm making it, and I give it to people and I give them what my involvement is and everything about my energy. And it is what it is. You can't go back and change life.
Right.
Like this is also just really remarkable in terms of all the kinds of way that you can navigate this. I've always been really fascinated by the way something like a line could be created through scraping back negatively through the paint. It could also be in other places, perhaps actually inscribed with drawing. In an area like this, looking up at this kind of spot, you can see that this part is actually drawn, this part is scraped. We then have interrupting shapes. How do some of these different additive and subtractive ways of working come together in a painting like this?
It might sound funny, but it's like, sometimes I feel like it's just like out of desperation to like, I feel like I have like a kind of toolbox of stuff that I can do with paint that I've built up over the years, and it's all constantly expanding and changing.
Yeah.
And then it's like you end up in a situation, and it's just a process of trying to figure out like what works here and what works there. Well, it's like you've ever seen like those like kind of survivalist shows where they drop a guy in the middle of nowhere and he has to like figure out how to survive with like a piece of gum and a stick or something. And it almost feels like that. I mean, it's funny, but it's like you're trying to figure out, like, what can I do with this, with what I have. To like,
well, it's obviously a very powerful metaphor. You obviously are referring to Bear Bryant. Is it Bear Bryant? Oh, no, Bear Bryant is the Alabama football coach. His name is like Bryant or Bear or something like that.
Yeah, one of those guys.
You know, a famous metaphor for art making, of course, is Braque and Picasso. They're saying that, you know, they are mountaineers like roped to one another. And I think that's kind of the thrill for viewers for your work is you really, to me, are incredibly generous in terms of how you have this open process that doesn't hide, you know, any part of the pleasure, the difficulties, every part of figuring out how this all comes together. Now, going back to Braque and Picasso, obviously, we've mentioned you've really been looking at a lot of Picasso recently.
Yeah, I have. You know, it's funny. I think I've actually been looking at more Matisse recently, and it just ends up looking like I'm looking at more Picasso. It's
I was going to ask you the Matisse question later, but that's
yeah.
Well, one reason that I mentioned Picasso is, of course, you have this fascinating dot pattern that's functioning here. And you've mentioned that someone like Hans Hofmann has been a big influence for you in terms of pushing and creating space. Here we have a dot pattern that hopefully we can sort of show, which inscribes the surface and defines the surface of these paintings, but then also defines space as well.
Yeah, it defines space. It's like, and it also, you know, kind of acts as like a screen too, or a filter, so that it's able to kind of define form in that way. It'll push certain things back and bring certain things forward, but without like completely like obliterating the things it's pushing back.
Well,
so
in a painting like this, you know, you have these kinds of, again, you have this pattern. You also have this, which sort of reminds me of John's, and I think we've seen this morph a little bit if we look back.
They're kind of
got a little bit of that. This painting also, and another thing that I find fascinating, it's called Arc with Forms, and so you can see the arc, you can see this feeling of a landscape. It makes you think about even Munch, but at the same time, as soon as you start to see other things like this odd kind of horse form or other things, the painting to me feels like it changes. You find an anchor point, like perhaps this, it helps you define space, your eye navigates this painting, but then, you know, you really kind of like, it'll change once you start to like look at something else, and like these, like the whites start to become a topic or something. And then of course the hilarity of this is the TD, which I did not, this is the first time I saw it, obviously, but it was actually almost a year after I'd had the painting before I noticed that could be, yeah, hey, I'm not the most observant art dealer, I do my best. So this has been a really creative time for you, and I think, you know, we're gonna talk about new work in the studio. This is a drawing called New Ideas, which I felt like was a nice way to move ahead. It's got a lot of interesting stuff going on. And what are the processes that are actually at work in this drawing?
So this one in particular, there's kind of a discarded screen print that was part of another project that I had lying around. I took that and just started painting and collaging on top of it. So the paint is like, it's acrylic gouache. So it's basically acrylic, but it has like a really high pigment level and like flat finish to it. And then the collage elements are just found images, usually out of like art and fashion magazines tend to be like the best sources I've found, because they're mostly pictures, right?
So this is called New Ideas, and it's a nice transition to sort of looking at, there's a lot drawing in the practice. I couldn't help but include that. This is actually a 2018 work painting on paper called Constellation that I think is incredibly beautiful and love. But moving forward, I think this is an image that when I saw it was just like, wow. So you're in a creative time right now. Tell us about, you know, what's your life like these weeks?
Well, I'm getting into studio a lot less than I'd like to, honestly, but I'm able to work from home a little bit. But this stuff is all done in studio. These are like these smaller paintings that I've been working on basically since the beginning of the year. I've always had like this, part of my process has always involved working small. I mean, people usually associate my work with like really big paintings or like kind of like larger work. But I've always had like this practice of working small alongside that, and that's been constant. Like
Well,
and
if I can interrupt briefly, just to only make the other comment that you did once say that you almost think of your larger paintings as being like a quilt of smaller works in a sense.
sometimes they definitely feel that way. Yeah.
And you could sort of start to see these groupings in this picture and areas kind of almost starting to come together as you've perhaps arranged them on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I feel like over the last couple of years, I haven't been working on that many small paintings though. And it's always come, there's like this always back and forth. Like sometimes I make a lot of small paintings, sometimes I don't make that many. And I just like the beginning of this year, I decided like, yeah, I should make a lot of small paintings, because it's always been like a really kind of generative process for my work. It's just, the stakes are a little lower, I guess, in terms of like, just like logistically, I guess you can say, like you're not like you can really mess up a small painting and it's like fine, If you really mess up a big painting, it usually that might be fine too, actually.
Yeah, I thought basically
it's less intimidating.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about maybe the rise of subject matter, or not the rise, but subject matter in the new body of work.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, it's funny because I mentioned yesterday that maybe we should talk about that. And then, as soon as I said that, I was like, what am I thinking of? Like, I mean, it's not, I think what I was trying to get at with that is that, just kind of the fact that there is subject matter in the newer paintings, in terms of there's like this kind of, figuration that's been like emergent over the last few years.
Sure.
And it seems to become more and more defined.
Okay.
As far as like talking about the actual subject matter, it's like there's not much to talk about. Like I don't, the subject matter, for what it is, it like speaks for itself, I think, pretty clearly.
Well, perhaps stepping back for a second, you have, of course, I think that famous thing where, Clement Greenberg is trying to deal with this issue where people are like saying, well, abstract painting isn't about anything. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
After a series of essays, he comes to the point of having material content and subject matter, and makes the point that material content has meaning, in the creation of abstraction. And then you, of course, have people more active with how they want to label things, like Harold Rosenberg, who's talking about action painting and connecting it to that kind of thing. But in terms of subject matter, and obviously you have plenty in terms of material content and how the paintings come together, maybe we could just talk a little bit about, in your early work, of course, it's very much landscape. I always took a dystopic landscape. There was a piece you made that I always have loved, because it was an incredible moment here in LA, which was about 2005. We're pretty close to the missile base that's I can't remember what it's called.
Vandenberg.
Thank you, Vandenberg. And so they fired off effectively, with my understanding, some kind of nuclear weapon that was designed to shoot things down, maybe. I'm obviously not.
Yeah, it was like the kind of missile intercept system they were working on. Where
but my point being, it was this incredible thing that if you saw in the sky was just like so unworldly, yet in the landscape. And you had that in a lot of shopping malls and colors and things. And so this feeling of landscape, this feeling of push-pull, this feeling of objects in space, if we were to say, look at, something like one of these skull pieces up here, or even here, this painting is called Portrait. At the same, are you hearing odd noise? Is that coming from me? No?
No, that's birds outside my studio.
Okay, I thought maybe it was a chew toy. So anyway, we have a number of really beautiful and interesting paintings here, and then we'll move on to look at some of them individually. But what about, painting, what's going on in your Instagram account? You're saying that you're not getting in the studio as much as you might like, but you are working from home a lot. You're also
Yeah.
a lot of tabletop still lifes right now, and things that you really probably haven't shared with people.
No, yeah, it's funny. It's like, I mean, I'm like, where do I start with this? Because this we could talk about stuff for, hours and hours. But yes, basically, like I've had this idea for quite a while actually, of just kind of like, uh, maybe like re-examining like my relationship to painting in a certain way, and I felt like, um one way to do that might be to just like, do something really kind of basic and or seemingly simple, maybe deceptively simple, of like working from observation in some way.
Well, you can
So
see like your color sense, your material sense, and some of these pieces that you've been showing. And if people do have questions, you can ask them in, there's a Q&A, you can put them in the chat. Tomory will do a better job monitoring.
Yeah, someone was asking about color, so I think we should talk about color in a second. But
do it.
with the paintings I've been doing at home, they're like kind of, they're like kind of like little observational landscape paintings with like they're little easel paintings, and that's a way of working that I haven't really seriously considered doing since like I was a student, but it's just been really interesting to kind of see that as somewhat of a counterpoint to the studio practice, because I feel like the studio practice is very much, I mean, I mentioned before, it's like this feedback loop, where it really like generates off itself. But then to step back and make a painting that's kind of premised on like the perception of something out there, some object that you're perceiving, it's been a nice kind of shift in a way.
Well, it's one of the things I think that's very interesting about it is that, I'm a failed painter, and I was trained in, very much like oil painting and observed painting. And people who paint from observation know that, when you're painting from observation, you're going to have natural light, you're going to have natural color. You're an incredible colorist, and you have the sense of space. It really adds all this depth to painting that a lot of people, that's very, very challenging to do. When I look at a painting like this, like the range in the color, the range in say a purple, the range in this is a very complicated dark right here to play off another one to then set off these other colors. Are you finding that, here we are, this painting's called Head. It has some spatial reference. Are you finding that that working from life is kind of coming back into some of these more abstract paintings, or is it?
It is. Yeah, it definitely is in a couple of ways. I think color is color probably most of all, like the influence on color of just like trying to work with it's like working with like perceived color and using that as a basis, not like so much literally as but seeing how color interacts with each other. So when I'm doing like these small kind of observational paintings or whatever you want to call them, it's like I'm working with colors relationships to each other a lot more than trying to like nail the specific like local color. But and that kind of like working with color that way, I mean, it's what you do in painting anyway all the time, but it's kind of I guess I've gotten better at it, hopefully, maybe, by doing these little paintings.
This is a beautiful painting, and here also you have such a great feeling between the feeling of what's been scraped, the feeling of what's been added here. very sort of, with the brush, you're creating mark in different ways. You're also sort of dealing with feelings of transparency and opacity in terms of the paint itself. I love this one. I mean, this is sorry, there will be some moments where I get a little fanny. I can't help it. Yeah, what does it feel like with some of these? I mean, here you're kind of we had that great painting bust in our show, which found a happy home and people were really excited about. What does it feel like to be kind of getting, I mean, I often see figures in the work, but.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think the way I'm making these paintings, the kind of, process that goes into them, like, hasn't changed that much, but I think it's just developed further. And, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the time when I'm working, I'm really just trying to figure out what I'm painting, like that's like the thing that's going on. It's like, all the kind of work and, development of the paintings and scraping it off and, putting paint back on. It's like trying to answer this question of what am I painting? And, and it feels like lately, like that answer keeps coming up as like these kind of, I'm finding like it's become interesting to kind of direct that question towards like really kind of like a traditional painting genres where you have like portraiture, landscape, still life, kind of like these kind of holders, these like ideas of kind of like set categories, almost like, funnel all that work towards that, and it can like it can hold all that stuff maybe to some degree, and you get like an interesting result that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's like it's a superficial label you're putting on things, but it's like, but it seems to like it works somehow. I don't know.
This is portrait. See if there's any.
So it's someone wants to see. Nicole Garten wants to ask, can you talk a bit about your use of pattern and small details within larger, more open composition? Yeah, I think there's kind of like this, the idea of paintings within paintings, comes up a lot with the larger work, where, you get like these kind of subsets of forms, like these smaller, forms kind of seem like almost modular in the sense that they're built out of other forms, and those forms are built out of other forms. So I think that kind of is really apparent in a lot of the larger work, and then you can look at the smaller work and maybe like see like, oh yeah, like you can see like in the larger paintings, like these smaller paintings are like they're almost set in there in certain places, and then kind of tried to tie together in some ways. Like a lot of the times with the larger work, there'll be like some area that I'm particularly really like, and then like another area over here that it's really interesting too, and it's kind of like that old problem of trying to get them to connect in some way. So maybe that answers that question.
Well, so we're featuring, it's about 9:30 here, so I think we'll be wrapping it up. Again, it's just really been a real pleasure for us to share this with you. Tomory, thank you so much for inviting us into your studio and giving us some thoughts on your painting. We're featuring Tomory's work at the Knot Affair, which is opening on Wednesday. It's a fun, good fair that while we do the larger fair in Miami and Basel in Switzerland and such, we've always been NADA members going. I first went in 2004, and I like the organization, and I like what it's doing for artists. And I think Tomory's really excited to be participating. So please check that out. And is there anything else that you want to add, Tomory?
Let's see. There is a question here about working sculpturally or going three-dimensional with the work, and if I've thought about that. I have thought about that. I've thought about that a lot. I haven't done it, but you know, maybe one day we'll see. I don't know. I really, in my experience, like working three-dimensionally versus two-dimensionally, it's a whole different kind of like conceptual process in a way. It's like if it's really easy to make fast changes almost at the speed of thought when I'm painting. With sculpture, like you can't do that. There's like the physical world does not cooperate like that as much as you'd like it to.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a lot of time to like, you know, recarve something or to like re-weld a piece of steel or whatever. So maybe one day, but
sculpture time versus painter time.
Exactly. Sculpture time. I haven't managed to bridge that yet.
Yeah, sculptors love to harass painters on that topic.
Yeah.
So again, we're interviewing, talking with Pam Jordan tomorrow at 9 a.m. And again, as I say, one of the great things about this has been really just enjoying the community right now. Thank you so much for coming out. We've got a lot of people here today coming from all around the world, which is very cool. Tomory, again, thank you so much for letting us in. You know, people who are watching today really got to see something that you don't really get to see in terms of some of these works. And as I say, Tomory is being incredibly generous and also on his Instagram right now showing some amazing pieces, which are available. And you should really go check those out. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Tomory, have a good one. And we'll talk more soon.
Thank you.